Hey friends, my name is Z and you're watching Yi Makes It Easy. And welcome to the last section for IGCSE Business Studies for today. We have section 6 for external influences on business issues. And for the first video for section 6, we have 6.1 for economic issues. And by the end of the lesson, you should be able to describe 6.1.1 business cycle and 6.1.2 how government control over the economy affects business activity and how businesses may respond to it. So check out the pinned comment for all the timestamps and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe and ring the notification bell. And we'll move on to 6.1.1, the business cycle. And here's the wider economy and how it can affect the business. What happens in the wider economy will affect the businesses either directly or via the customer, like indirectly. And some of these external changes will be due to the factors such as the business cycle, or as a result of government policy such as the change in interest rates. And the effects of these changes in the economy will not be under the control of the businesses themselves, but they can decide how they will react to the changes or the effects, such as changes in exchange rate or the rates of unemployment. So here's the main stages of business cycle. So economic growth may not be achieved steadily every year, and there are often years when the economy does not grow at all or when the value of the GDP or the gross domestic product actually falls. And this pattern is shown on the trade cycle diagram right here. You can see it's divided into 4 different sections and it repeats. Starting with growth. And this is when the GDP rises and unemployment falls and high living standards for the people. Then here we have the boom, and it's caused by too much spending, and the prices start to rise quickly and there are shortage of skilled workers. And business costs will be rising and the businesses will become uncertain about the future. And when we enter into the recession, it's caused by too little spending, and it's a period where the GDP falls and most businesses will experience falling demand and profits, and workers may lose their job. Then after recession we have the slump, and it's like a serious and long drawn out recession, and unemployment reaches very high levels and prices may fall, and many businesses will fail to survive this period. And as you can see in this diagram, after the slump it will be growth and boom, so the cycle repeats. Then we have the impacts on businesses of changes in employment levels, inflation and GDP. The changes in economic indicators will have an impact, either positive or negative, on most businesses. And number one, changes in employment levels will affect the ability of the business to recruit new employees and also the incomes of customers. And let's say if unemployment goes up, then it may be easier to recruit new employees as there are more people to choose from, and customers may have lost their jobs so income levels may have fallen, therefore reducing the amount of sales made by the business. However, some businesses that sell cheaper products may see sales increase as customers cut back on spending and buy cheaper alternatives. And number 2, rising inflation. It may result in the business cost increasing, and the prices of products may have to be increased, leading to falling sales for the business. And rising prices of essential products may also mean customers have less income available for the purchase of non-essential products. So the effect of increasing inflation on businesses may depend on the type of products they sell, whether it's essential or non-essential. And number 3, increasing GDP means that the economy is growing in the country. And generally, businesses will benefit from increasing sales as more people have jobs and have more income to spend on buying products. And it may start to get more difficult to recruit new employees if unemployment rate starts to fall at the same time. Then we have 6.1.2, how government control affects business activity and the response. So most governments have the following objectives for the economy: low inflation, low unemployment, economic growth, and the balance of payments between imports and exports. So we'll start with low inflation. Inflation occurs when there's a rise in average prices over a period of time, and low inflation is an important objective because when prices rise rapidly, it can be serious for the whole country. And these are the problems of a country will have if there's a rapid inflation. Number 1, the workers' wages will not buy as many goods as before. This means people's real incomes will fall. And essentially, real income is a value in terms of what can be bought of an income. And number 2, the prices of goods produced in the country will be higher than those in other countries, and therefore people may buy foreign goods instead, so the jobs in the local country will be lost. And number 3, the businesses will be unlikely to expand and create more jobs in the near future, and therefore the living standards are likely to fall. So here's some graphs like as food price inflation increases and the effects in the country. And then we have low unemployment. When people want to work but cannot find a job, they are unemployed. And these are the problems unemployment causes. Number 1, unemployed people do not produce any goods or services, and the total level of output in the country will be lower than it could be. And number 2, the government pays unemployment benefits to those without a job, and a high level of unemployment will cost the government a great deal of money, and this cannot be spent on other things such as schools and hospitals. And therefore, low unemployment will help to increase the output of the country and improve workers' living standards. Then we have economic growth. An economy is said to grow when the total level of output of goods and services in the country increases, and when the country's GDP is falling, there's no economic growth. And the problem this causes include the following. Number 1, as output is falling, fewer workers are needed and unemployment will occur. There will be higher rates of unemployment. And number 2, the average standard of living of the population, which is the number of goods and services they can afford to buy in 1 year, will decline. And in effect, most people will become poorer due to the lower purchasing power. And number 3, the business owners will not expand their businesses as people will have less money to spend on the products they make. So there's no point expanding the business when no one's going to buy things from you. Then we have balance of payments. Exports are goods and services sold by one country to people and businesses in another country, and these bring money or foreign currency into a country. And in the opposite, imports are goods bought in from other countries, and these must be purchased with foreign currency, so these lead to money flowing out of a country. And the government will aim to achieve equality or balance between these over a period of time, and the difference between a country's exports and imports is called the balance of payments. And if the value of the country's import is greater than the value of its exports, then it has a balance of payments deficit. So these are the problems that could result due to the balance of payments deficit. Number 1, the country could run out of foreign currencies and it may have to borrow from abroad. And number 2, the price of the country's currency against other currencies, or the exchange rate, will be likely to fall. And this is called exchange rate depreciation. And the country's currency will now buy less abroad than it did before depreciation. Then we have the government economic policies. And the governments have a great deal of economic power, and they raise taxes and spend this money on a wide range of services and state benefits. And government use this power to try to achieve the objectives we've looked at just now. And business managers need to know how their business could be affected by the government economic decisions. And the main ways in which governments can influence the economy, sometimes called economic policies, are as follows. Number 1, fiscal policy, or taxes and government spending. Number 2, monetary policy, or the interest rates. And number 3, supply side policies. And we'll look into all 3 of them now, starting with fiscal policies, the taxes and government spending. All governments spend money on schools, hospitals, roads, defense, and so on. And this expenditure is very important to some businesses. For example, let's say number 1, construction businesses will benefit from a new road building scheme if the money is spent on road building by the government. Number 2, defense industries will gain if the government equips the army. And number 3, the bus manufacturers will benefit from government spending on public transport. So here I have 3 questions. Number 1, where do governments raise this money from? And it's mainly from the taxes on individuals and businesses, for example, like income tax, corporation tax, or any other indirect tax. Number 2, what are the main types of taxes? And as I mentioned, there's direct tax on the income of the businesses and individuals, and indirect tax on spending. And number 3, how do these taxes affect the business activity? It affects in a number of different ways. And we will look at all these effects by studying the impacts of 4 common taxes, like let's say income tax for number 1, number 2, profit tax or corporation tax, number 3, indirect tax or VAT, like value added tax, and number 4, import tariffs. Starting with income tax, and this is a tax on people's income, and usually the higher the person's income, the greater will be the amount of tax they will have to pay to the government. And income tax is set at like a certain percentage of income, like let's say 25% of income. And in many countries, the tax is progressive. This means that the rich pay tax at a higher percentage than the poor. And how would businesses be affected by an increase in the rate of income tax? Individual taxpayers will have a lower disposable income, and they will have less money after tax to spend and save. And businesses will be likely to see a fall in sales, and managers may decide to produce fewer goods as sales are lower, or they may produce like cheaper goods. And here's just an income tax flowchart where you can have a read. And which businesses are more likely to be affected by the increase in income tax rate? And it's most likely like businesses which produce luxury goods which consumers do not have to buy and are likely to be most affected, or like non-essential goods. And businesses producing essential goods and services will be less affected, as consumers will have to buy these products. Then we have profit tax or corporation tax, and this is a tax on the profits made by the business, usually the companies. And how would an increase in the rate of corporation tax affect businesses? And there will be 2 main effects. Number 1, the businesses will have lower profits after tax, and managers will therefore have less money or finance to put back into the business, and the business will find it more difficult to expand, and new projects such as additional factories or shops may have to be cancelled. And lower profits after tax is also bad news for the owners of the business, as there will be less money to pay back to the owners who originally invested in the business, and fewer people would want to start their own business if they consider that the government will take a large share of any of the profits made, and therefore companies' share price could fall. Then we have indirect tax. Indirect tax, or let's say VAT or value added tax, are added to the prices of products we all buy. And how would businesses be affected by an increase in indirect tax? And there will be 2 main effects as follow. Number 1, the prices of goods will rise, and consumers may buy fewer items as a result. And this will reduce the demand for the products made by businesses. However, not all businesses will be affected in the same way. If consumers need to buy a product such as a new battery for their alarm clock, then the price increase is unlikely to stop them doing so. However, they might buy fewer ice creams as their prices have risen. So basically this relates to the economics and diseconomies of scale, which I've mentioned in the past few lessons, and I'll link in the description if you don't understand. And number 2, as prices increase or rise, so the workers employed by the business will notice that their wages will buy less in the shop, and their real incomes, as I mentioned, have declined. And the businesses may be under pressure to raise wages, which will force up the cost of making the products. Then we have import tariffs or quotas. Many governments try to reduce the import of products from other countries by putting special taxes on them, and these are called import tariffs, and they raise money for the government. And many international organizations such as the World Trade Organization are trying to reduce the number of governments which do this. And how would businesses in a country be affected if the government put tariffs on imports into the country? There are 3 possible effects. Number 1, the businesses will be benefited if they are competing with imported goods, and these will now be more expensive, leading to an increase in sales of home-produced goods or locally produced goods. Number 2, the businesses will have higher costs if they have to import raw materials or components from their own factories, from overseas or abroad. and this will now be more expensive. And number 3, other countries may now take the same action and introduce import tariffs too, and this is called retaliation, and the business trying to export to these countries will probably sell fewer goods than before due to higher prices. And another method of a government can use to limit imports is to introduce an import quota or physical limit on the quantity of a product that can be brought in. Quotas can be used selectively to protect certain industries from foreign competition that may be seen as unfair or damaging to jobs. And here's changes in government spending. Government in most countries spend the tax revenue they receive on programs such as number 1, education, health, defense, law and order, and transport like roads and railways. And when governments want to boost economic growth, they can increase the spending on these programs, and this will create more demand in the economy, more jobs, and the GDP will increase. And if governments want to save money, for example, if they have overborrowed, they will often cut government spending, and these cuts could have a considerable impact on the businesses which, for example, produce equipment for schools, hospitals, and defense equipment. And number 2, build roads, bridges, and railways. Then here's monetary policy for interest rates, and I'll skim through this. An interest rate is the cost of borrowing money. In most countries, the level of interest rate is fixed by the government or the central bank via monetary policy. And the following are likely to be the main effects of higher interest rates. Number 1, the firms with existing variable interest loans may have to pay more in interest to the bank. Number 2, the managers thinking about borrowing money to expand their business may delay their decisions. Number 3, in addition to the point above, if a business makes expensive consumer items like cars or it builds houses, then it will notice that the consumer demand will fall for another reason, as consumers will be unwilling to borrow money to buy these expensive items if the interest rates are higher. And these businesses will have to reduce output and make workers redundant. And number 4, higher interest rates in one country will encourage foreign banks and individuals to deposit their capital in that country, and they will be able to earn higher interest rates on their capital. And by switching their money into this country's currency, they are increasing the demand for it, and the exchange rate will rise, and this is called exchange rate appreciation. And this will have the effect of making imported goods appear cheaper, and exports will now be more expensive. And the opposite effect, if the exchange rate of currency declines, it's called an exchange rate depreciation, as we have seen just now. And lastly, here's supply side policies. And in recent years, many governments have tried to make the economy of the country more efficient, and they aim to increase the competitiveness of the industries against those from other countries. And this will allow the businesses to expand, produce more, and employ more workers. And some of the policies which have been used to achieve these aims are listed below, and they are called supply side policies because they are trying to improve the efficient supply of goods and services. But before that, here's just a quick diagram of a summary. Government economic policies, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and supply side policy. And here are examples of supply side policies like number 1, privatization. And privatization is now very common, and the aim is to use the profit motive to improve business efficiency. So what privatization is basically is that it's a company which is originally owned by the government or in the public sector, and the government lets someone else in the private sector to control it. So like privatization. Number 2, improve training and education. The government's plan to improve the skills of the country's workers, and this is particularly important in those industries such as computer software, which are often very short of skilled staff. And number 3, increase competition in small industries. And this may be done by reducing government controls over industry or by acting against monopolies. Then here's how businesses might react to changes in economic policy. We have the following table explains how businesses might react to some major changes in government economic policy, and the business decisions and effects could be reversed if the government decided to reduce taxes, government spending, or interest rates. So here's the table, and I'll go through this and I'll skim through it. So here's the government policy change. Let's say increase income tax. And the possible business decision is that there will be lower prices and produce cheaper products to allow for the lower prices. But the problem is that there will be less profit and the brand image will be damaged. Number 2, the government policy of increased tariffs on imports. The business will probably focus more on the demand, like domestic market, as locally produced goods are now cheaper, and they will switch from buying imported goods to locally produced goods. But the problem is that it might still be more profitable to export it, and foreign materials and components might be at higher quality. And number 3, increase interest rates. And the business might reduce investment as future growth will be less, and they will develop cheaper products that consumers will be better at afford, and they will sell assets for cash to reduce existing loans. However, the problem is that other companies might still grow, so market share will be lost. And number 2, it depends on the product, but could consumers think like the quality and the brand image are lower? And number 3, the assets might be needed for future expansion. And number 4, we have increased government spending. And the business might switch marketing strategy to gain more public sector contracts, like let's say building or equipping schools and hospitals. But problem is that there may be greater competition if other businesses take the same action. And you will notice that all of these business decisions could have both negative and positive effects, and the overall impacts of these decisions may depend on 2 things: how big the changes are in the government policy, and what actions competitors take in the response to these policies. And lastly, here's some definitions for 6.1 of economic issue. We have GDP, or gross domestic products. It's the total value of output of goods and services in a country in 1 year. Recession is when there's a period of falling GDP. Inflation is when there's an increase in the average price level of goods and services over time. Unemployment exists when people who are willing and able to work cannot find a job. Economic growth is when a country's GDP increases and more goods and services are produced than in the previous year. The balance of payments, it records the difference between a country's exports and imports. The real income is the value of income, and it falls when prices rise faster than like money income. Exports are goods and services sold from one country to another countries. Imports is the opposite. They are goods and services bought in by one country from other countries. Exchange rate is the price of one currency in terms of another. For example, £1 gives us $1.5. Then we have exchange rate depreciation. And exchange rate depreciation is a fall in the value of a currency compared with other currencies. Fiscal policy is any change by the government in tax rates of public sector spending. Direct taxes are paid directly from incomes, for example, income tax or profit tax. Indirect taxes are added to the price of goods, and taxpayers pay the tax as they purchase the goods. For example, VAT. Disposable income is the total level of income a taxpayer has after paying income tax and they can spend on it. Import tariff is a tax on an imported product. Imported quota is a physical limit on the quantity of product that can be imported. Monetary policy is a change in interest rate by the government or central bank, for example by the European Central Bank. Exchange rate appreciation is the rise in value of the currency compared with other currencies. And lastly, supply side policies. Supply side policies try to increase the competitiveness of industries in an economy against those from other countries. And these policies try to make the economy more efficient. And that's it for this 6.1 video for IGCSE Business Studies. For today, we look into economic issues. And I hope you all found it useful and helpful. And if you did, please leave a like and subscribe and ring the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any future videos. And drop any comments or constructive criticism if you have any, and I'll reply to them in the comment section. and feel free to email me if you have any questions, and check out my Instagram in the description for more daily content. And that's it for this first video for Section 6 of IGCSE Business for 6.1 Economic Issues. And I hope you all enjoy it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, stay safe and happy learning.